The approved document is what becomes the public document. Everything prior to it being approved is deliberative, and under the agreement that we have with our co-leads on this is that's, and it's not distributable to anybody, whether it's a $5,000 EIS application or a multi-million-dollar one. So as soon as the contract is approved, it will go up on the website. I mean, it becomes public information, and we're committed to getting that to there. But if you want to have if you want to just look at it, but how are you going to make suggestions without showing your hand on it? Are you going to say well, we aren't charging enough on the rail issues, or we aren't charging enough on the hearing issues, or how are you going to be able to view this thing? I mean, this is what the attorney said to you today is it's what you do with it once you see it is what's going to get you in trouble. So,
and I don't think either of us are suggesting we do anything with it.
Yeah, it is going to become a public document, and the staff and my administration and through the staff is committed to what we're doing is going to be within the laws that we can legally do. If it's not, then the criticism has to be pointed back to myself and to the administration and to the co-leads of not doing it right. I just don't see how we're going to be able to make this thing work under the rules that we have in place with the co-leads and making it happen. When the contract is done, it's going to be signed by all the co-leads and BNSF and GPT and CH2M Hill and all the intricacies that are related to that end of it, and that's going to set the course of what's going to get looked at for the next 13 months, and then the draft EIS is established. So as I said today, it's not that I don't want to work with you on this, but I don't want to get you in trouble either. And as identified is under the rules that we have in place right now through the purchasing end of it is this squarely falls on the executive to take care of. It doesn't fall on Jack Lowes. It falls on the office of county executive to make it happen. So whether I'm just challenged by how trying to make a change at this point in the process is going to look as anything but trying to manipulate it. As a matter of fact is if you want to have a vote on it on the end, I would encourage you to stay away from making changes at this point. So,
just one quick comment. I have absolutely no question about the county executive or his office's integrity or following the law or doing his best. I have a ton of respect and appreciation for our executive and his administration. So that's not, and no one's saying anything other than that. I was trying to get at the issue of transparency, and I think Mr. Kremen also brought it up in a way that it does sound ridiculous that we would put a contract up for public review before we've signed it. I get that, but I think
we do that all the time.
We do that all the time with, I guess we actually will.
We had a packet full of them
with smaller contracts, but they're not like 14 multi-party contracts for millions of dollars. So I don't know. It just seems like it's.
Judges on this.
I think if we're quasi-judicial, I'm sorry, this is getting a little out of control. Here's my issue. I think public review of those contracts, if it's feasible and legal, might be a way to address this issue without jeopardizing our quasi-judicial status.
We have a lawyer here.
It sounds like that was what both you and Mr. Kremen were trying to report, but it sounds like there's an agreement with the other agencies that we can't do that.
Just talking with Tyler, and he clarified a point for me and be more blunt about it. He probably corrected me, and I appreciate that about Tyler. The final draft is going to be released in the very near future, and it's going to be released before it's going to be signed by all the parties. And as soon as that document becomes available, it's going to get posted on the web. So in the very near future, that's going to happen. I'd encourage the public and the council to stay in tune, and we'll put a press release out when that happens. the community will have their opportunity to take a look at it at that particular time. So I think that solves the question of whether the transparency is out there.
Couldn't you have told us that 4 hours ago?
Mr. Chair?
I wish that we could have had this discussion before the open session. I might not have had to absorb quite as many bullets. But
yeah. Clarification, Mr. Executive, on something you just said. I believe there's a draft EIS in this process, and then there's going to be a final EIS. You just said the final draft. You mean the draft?
Final of the contract, not the final of the EIS. The contracts right now are deliberative. They're going to be final, and when they get to be final,
so it's the contract you're talking about, not
the contract I'm talking about. Yes.
Mr. Kremen?
Thank you. And what I'm saying here, because I mean this in no disparaging way. Information, more, as long as it doesn't get you in trouble legally, is always a good thing. For instance, if there was a little more specificity about how many hours staff is spending, what staff is spending, whether it's PDS, whether it's the health department or whatever, and how much. I think a lot of some of the misperceptions could have been avoided had there been a little more proactive dissemination of information about how much money we're spending on staff time and who's doing what and all that. And I don't mean getting down to the nitty gritty of what Tyler, how many hours, but I think it would, especially this is a supercharged issue. But even if it weren't, I think that the council, the public, and everyone, the greater community, would be well served by, getting information about how much staff time is being spent, and how much money we're getting reimbursed by the proponents. I think it would be a good thing, and I think there would be much more upside than downside as long as legal feels comfortable with, with us not putting ourselves in a legally vulnerable situation.
I have no problem. I have no problem with that. We've sent multiple documents out over the last year in terms of how many hours that we have spent. Obviously, by some of the comments tonight, is there's members of the community that disagree that we're accounting for them properly, and have made repeated points that they don't believe that we can do the work that we've done within the hours that we're there. So we've done that. All the pertinent documents related to the everything's up on the website. We've answered every email that's coming in on this. We have started at the beginning of the year to try to do a bit more of a public relations push to just try to get the community up to date on what we legally and what we legally can't do as it relates to it. With that said, it's sometimes difficult to break through on that and to get the message out that we're trying to of what we're factually doing related to it. And a tremendous amount of time is spent in my office right now related to this project, oil trains, water, all of these things, because it is a challenge to get the message out and to have. And I appreciate the emails that come in. It gives us the opportunity to send the right thing out. So I appreciate your comments, and we're going to continue to do our best to make sure that we do what we can to make sure that the facts are out there.
Well, I just want you to know, Mr. Executive, that empathize.
You've lived it for 16 years.
I've been in your shoes, and I understand the constraints and the problems with informing the public and having the public believe what you're telling them. I mean, because there's just some that just are extremely skeptical and not going to be in a very receptive mode. But I think overall, you and your staff and I think Tyler is such an asset to our county, and you are well served by him and others in your administration. And again, I just want you to know that anything that I've said here tonight was said in a constructive, positive vein, and I just want you to know that I feel your pain.
Mr. Browne.
First, I'll just echo Mr. Mann's comments that I've seen no evidence that anything's been done improperly on your department. So just want to put that in for the record. A couple of questions. The term scope of work, for those who are not familiar, is a document that outlines what you're asking someone else to do. And my first question is, I'm assuming the final contract will include a scope of work, and that will include a list of questions that must be asked and answered during the EIS process. Is that correct?
Tyler Schroeder, Whatcom County Planning. Yes, that's accurate. The scope of work is a very detailed, I don't know the number of pages off the top of my head, but it lays out what CH2M Hill has been hired to do by the county to prepare the draft EIS. So there's been a lot of discussion about a scoping report and a scoping document. So really, I think the community would be well served to use that scope of work to see where the draft EIS is going to be moving forward.
So is that scope of work already published?
It is not. That's the document that we believe is final, is no longer deliberative draft, because we've asked for signatures, and that we will be posting on the website here.
So once the final contract's posted, we will see what the provider is going to be asked to, what questions are going to be asked. And,
that is correct.
And those questions, that scope of work will include questions that the DOE and the Army Corps have come up with as well. It's a combined, it was always separate.
It is a combined effort to prepare the scope of work, because CH2M Hill is hired to prepare both the SEPA document for ecology and ourselves, and the NEPA document for the U.S. Army Corps. So okay. Yes, that scope of work has been meticulously reviewed and agreed upon by many attorneys and many people that work for the government agencies.
So there are approximately 120,000 comments during the public comment period. Who's decided which of those comments end up being incorporated into the scope of work?
We've reviewed those 125,000, 16,000 approximate unique comments and compiled those into topics in which each comment refers to and indicates, and shown the main points on each one of those comments, and then transferred that into the scope of work, so that within the legal parameters that SEPA is set up to do, those comments that address and can be accomplished will be looked at as we move forward with the draft EIS.
So if someone in this audience, for example, had submitted a comment which they think is relevant, but they don't see it addressed in the scope of work, what's their opportunity to bring that up?
So you will not see a specific reference to commenter number 112,642. What you will see is a broad description, as well as specific deliverables and specific direction for CH2M Hill to prepare the draft EIS. So the way SEPA is set up is that when the draft EIS is issued, that everybody that commented during the scoping period will review that draft EIS and then provide comment to say, You didn't address agencies, you didn't address my specific comment, or these are my comments that I have in regards to rail, in regards to herring population. And then SEPA is set up to require the agencies to respond to each one of those comments to the draft EIS to show how that comment was addressed, where the document was changed, or why the document wasn't changed associated with that comment. So that question to how the public will know their comments have been addressed will happen 13 months from now in the future when the draft EIS is issued and the comment period has been done.
So take a hypothetical. If someone said, I'm concerned about the impact on the ability to have a pineapple plantation, that would be, and they didn't see that specifically addressed, then the through the SEPA process, they'd say, I didn't see that addressed, and then was it...
And then the agencies in the final EIS would have to indicate why that wasn't addressed, or indicate, thank you for your comment on the draft EIS. We changed the EIS here to accommodate your plantation question.
Right. So then my next question is, how long after the draft EIS, there's a 30-day public comment period, correct? 30/45-day comment period.
That's what state law outlines today.
So after that period is closed and all the comments have been received, how long is allowed for the responses to those questions to be processed?
I don't believe there's a strict time frame in state law for the issuance of the final EIS.
Okay.
But don't quote me on that. I'd have to look at the WAC.
And then how long after the final EIS is released does this council have to review the final document?
Once the final EIS is released, it's anticipated that staff will take that EIS and the conditions or the criteria under the major project permit, major development permit, which are their 7 criteria on approval or denial. We will formulate some type of staff report to the hearing examiner, and the hearing examiner will hear the merits of the application and the merits of the EIS and make a decision and then recommend one way or the other to the council. So the question that you just asked, the details to that question are laid out in the major project permit code criteria that we have in Whatcom County Code.
I'm familiar with the 7 questions. I guess the question though is, when do we get to see the EIS? Do we have to wait until the hearing examiner's gone through their process, or are we allowed to see it beforehand?
Once the document is on record, which is when the FEIS, the final EIS, is issued, I believe the council would be able to review that document.
Because it would be online.
Correct.
And then what is our ability to comment during that process? Is there any time limit? So, for example, if the hearing examiner gives us their recommendation, when do we have to respond, for example?
I apologize, Councilmember Browne. I didn't really follow the question there at the end.
So sorry. So we get the final EIS that's released. It's then given to the hearing examiner. If we have questions that arise from the EIS, I guess the first question maybe to Ms. Frakes is, if we and the council have questions that arise from the final EIS, do we have a period to comment, or do we have to wait for the hearing examiner?
Well,
and by comment, I mean raise questions and ask for answers.
I think you would do that in the context of the decision you make ultimately after the hearing examiner when it comes to the council.
Okay. So the hearing examiner would give us their recommendation.
Right.
We would ask and have answered any questions. And is there correct?
I'm not sure what...
If the hearing examiner gives us a recommendation and we say, well, you haven't addressed the question about pineapple plantations, do we get an opportunity to ask that question and have it answered before we make a decision?
Yeah, I don't think that's the time you ask that question. If there's a deficiency with the EIS and somebody wants to appeal that decision, they can appeal that to the court. But I don't think that that's really your job at that point.
Right. And where I'm going with all these questions is I'm just trying to bring out sort of flesh out what the timeline is, what the process is for the benefit of the council and for the public, and if there's any way we can draw a sort of a chart that says this is what the sequence is going to be, that'd be very useful.
So there is a chart that is actually online that lays out the process, lays out all the permits that were required by Whatcom County and the EIS, and the timeframes associated with that. So one idea is that in the coming months, and I'd have to ask the executive, but we could come back and report out to you guys what that process looks like, so you have a better understanding of how the permit process is tied in to the EIS, staying away from the discussion of the permit and staying more to the discussion of the process.
Right.
One other point, and I apologize, is that my understanding is that the next council meeting on the 25th, we're going to be talking about the upcoming docket ideas and zoning text amendments. And there was discussion at the last council meeting about the major project permit and the timeframes associated with that and how that all lays out. So I do believe that the council, the planning commission, and staff will be having conversations about that as we move forward. But that'll be kind of decided more firmly next council meeting.
But forgive me, the process that you said is on the website.
It is. There's a one-page, two-page document that lays out timeframes associated with each action and timeframes before permit decisions would be made.
So, and that goes all the way through to the final decision by the county council?
It does.
Okay.
And it's been up there for a while. It's just tucked away in all the documents that are up there.
Mr. Mann.
Thank you for answering all these questions, Tyler. Mr. Brown's questions got me thinking about another wrinkle on this. So we get our recommendation from the hearing examiner, and that is based on the entire record, and we're not allowed to ask questions about pineapple plantations. Are we allowed or encouraged or prohibited from having public comment, like open session or public hearings at that point? If we're only supposed to consider the public record as it was compiled in the FEIS and then to the hearing examiner, then it comes to us with a recommendation, what's the status on public hearings after that? Or public comment?
I'm sorry, I'm not really prepared to answer these questions because I don't have the code in front of me. But
Tyler knows everything.
And I could be wrong, but I believe that the county council has the discretion to have its own public hearing. I could be wrong about that, but after the is that right? Yeah.
The major project permit language that we talked about last week that we may be talking about in the future allows for one open record hearing in front of the hearing examiner, and that one open record hearing might last for weeks if it's a 3-minute time frame for each person to do it. And then a recommendation comes to council, and the council has a number of options, and I believe they are, off the top of my head, a permit decision can be made, another open record hearing can be held, or transferring that project to the planning commission for additional public hearings to be held. That, I believe, is the layout and the process under the major project permit. There was some discussion that we had last week about whether or not that's consistent with the Local Project Act requirements and state law, and we were still going to be looking into that. But my understanding from reviewing it now is that it is, because the council, when major project permit ordinances were in place, when the actual ordinance came through, it was specific to allowing the council to hold another open record hearing. And the state law allows for more than one open record hearing if the council specifically requests that. And so my understanding from when that was originally adopted, that is why there'd be additional hearings in the major project permit. But that, again, is something that we were going to be reviewing and talking more if council decides next week to look at the major project permit process and how it gets accomplished.
And it's my understanding that we have 20 days from the time the hearing examiner gives it to us. Does that include all the other open hearings we potentially could have?
We wouldn't have time.
I'm not sure at this point.
Okay, so and that's what we can examine on the 25th when we talk about docketing maybe a change to give us, instead of 20 days, to give us 60 days or something.
To look at the process was that conversation.
Ms. Brenner.
One other question. Everything that's been submitted, that's on the, online or whatever, we're allowed to consider all that also in our, we have that discretion to consider comments too, right? It's already, because we know you guys have them. Right.
My understanding is that the council is allowed to look at what is on the record.
Okay.
And all of those comments
Thousands
associated
of stuff,
with the EIS will be on the record.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion in front of us for this resolution that started this long discussion, about 9 o'clock this morning, I believe.
Mr. Chair, it occurred to me that I never read the revised title. It might be good for you to read the revised title that,
Okay,
or I can read it.
The resolution in front of us is a resolution requesting the county executive not enter into further contract amendments that involve externally funded pass-through monies without county council review and approval. And since I was the maker of the motion, I'll just speak to the motion. First of all, I wanted to mention that there was a companion ordinance that kind of went with this, and that's been held in the Finance Committee for work at some point in the future. I also wanted to make sure that I said the same thing I said this morning, that when I brought these forward, it wasn't because I thought the executive was not following the code. I thought he was following the code perfectly. The concern was more with the code. I also think I made some comments this morning how I didn't, I'm trying to remember how Dan Gibson said this to me. I made some comments about how I didn't trust our legal counsel's opinion. Actually, I trust their opinion very much. I think they just are giving us very, very conservative legal advice, as in if you don't say coal or hear coal out loud, you're safe. You don't have to worry about your vote. I think the line for where we would have to worry about our vote is quite a ways from that. I think that there's been a lot of good points brought up this evening about how we reviewed this contract to begin with, and we found parts of it we didn't like the short review period for the scoping comments. We found some other problems we fixed, and that's why I brought this forward, and I think it's still valid. I'm really happy to hear that the contract, before it gets signed, is going to be posted on the web, because that takes care of a lot of the transparency issues, and one of my big ones is how can you get ready to respond to this huge amount of documents we're going to get within a 20-day period if we don't even have a clue what the scope is going to be, and they're going to go into a dark hole and work on this draft EIS for the next year or so. So I can see where this is all going, and I don't want to beat this horse any longer, so I suggested we just vote on the resolution. But
sorry, I have a question.
But Mr. Mann.
I think I already forgot what my question was. Oh, how would this resolution impact this current draft contract that you're about to
You already signed that, didn't you?
sign?
You didn't?
Well, the contract hasn't been signed. The resolution is asking him not to sign any more
Right.
contracts.
So that would in fact impact the one he mentioned already tonight. Okay.
Right. Ms. Brenner.
But it would tell him not to till we get a chance to review and approve and all that stuff. So,
Right. So some of it's mute by the fact that we publicly stated it's going to be posted on the web before it's signed.
well,
Mr. Browne.
we've already talked about the approval.
So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, but this resolution is non-binding on the county executive.
Absolutely.
So if we take a vote either way, the county executive is entitled to do what he wants. My first number one priority throughout this whole process has been to protect my right and the rest of the council's right to vote on their final project, and I'm reluctant to do anything that could possibly be considered to jeopardise that.
I understand that. All right. So we have the motion in front of us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
So that fails 6-1 with Councilmember Weimer in favor. Number 6. If Mr. Crawford's still awake.
I don't think that's mine.
Oh, Planning and Development Committee. a request for an extension.
Oh, that's me. Sorry.
That's why you're...
God, it's not that late.
Getting close.
All right. The reason you're all here, Planning and Development Committee, a request for an extension of the preliminary approval for the Northgate Industrial Park, number 2, binding site plan, filed by applicant Oxy Corporation. We discussed this in committee. It's been reviewed by the technical committee, and we recommended approval 2-0 with Ms. Brenner absent because she's ill. I recommend and I move approval of this request for an extension.
Okay, we have the motion from Mr. Mann in front of us. Any discussion?
I'll just add, through this process, the applicant was asked to comply with some additional parts of the code that have come in force since they did the original application. And in the committee, they made it clear, and the county confirmed that they had agreed to 100% of those additional conditions.
Yep, I saw that. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Next one has no committee assignment. It's a resolution approving a request by the Northwest Park and Recreation District number 2 commissioners to change the name of the district to the Blaine Birch Bay Park and Recreation District.
I'll move approval, but this is the easiest thing we've had all night. Well, that's why you guys are still here.
I think we should discuss it for an hour.
We're here for discussion.
Are we going to have a public comment period for this?
Public comment period.
Oh, God.
You sure Birch Bay shouldn't be in front of Blaine? I mean, should it be the Birch Bay Blaine?
We had that issue. We decided just to go.
Alphabetical order.
All right. Is there any other discussion on this resolution?
Did someone move approval?
Ms. Brenner moved
Okay.
approval. We have the motion in front of us.
I'll support it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Sorry that you had to wait so long.
Thank you.
The other one on the agenda is a nomination and appointment to fill one vacancy on the Whatcom Family Community Network. The applicant is Michelle Williams. Mr. Kremen has moved the nomination for approval. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously.
Uh-oh.
I think we are to our introduction items.
I'll move approval.
So we have 6 introduction items. Ms. Brenner has moved approval, including the replacement blue version of number 6. Is that correct?
Oh.
Yes. All right. Any discussion on the introduction items? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We're on to other business, and I know Ms. Brenner has one.
Okay. There was, let's see, who was it? It was, spoke to that. Was that John or Mark? Mark spoke to this at open session, that they created their own transportation benefit district, and that unfortunately the state law is like so restrictive. There's only transportation benefits should have to do with all parts of transportation, but right now it can only be concrete and asphalt and stuff like that. And the state legislature has the ability to enlarge that to allow for other things like extra school buses. I mean, pretty much the kids from Point Roberts can't even do after-school activities. And they're in a very unique situation. In fact, they voted themselves this tax because of these kind of difficulties. And that's why it's very unfortunate that it is so restrictive. This is a letter that we would send to our state legislature. It's a resolution to our state legislature asking them to redo the law that allows it to be used for broader uses, specifically for school bus turnarounds and stuff like that.
All right. So you've made the motion?
That's my motion, please.
Okay. So Ms. Brenner's made a motion in front of us. I don't know if people have had time to take a look at this. Mr. Crawford.
Well, I don't know much about this issue, so I'm not going to support it until I learn more. I will say my instincts are it is appropriate when we create transportation benefit districts that they go as much for infrastructure as possible. So also the school districts are in charge of school buses, not transportation benefit districts. Now, I understand your intent is to widen and broaden that. That goes against my instincts on the nexus between a collection of a tax for transportation and what it would go for. So again, had this been, I don't know, we would almost need a presentation because there's a lot I don't understand about this tax, and I'm just not inclined to support something I know practically nothing about. In fact, I didn't really even know. I think this is a gas tax that's collected only in Point Roberts or something. But other than that, I really don't know much about it.
Ms. Brenner.
Well, I did get this out to people in the last few days, but it wasn't any kind of heavy reading. And
the background may be heavy reading.
Well, Mark Robbins made the presentation, and he said it practically word for word. This is where we do something to help the residents in parts of Whatcom County, and it is up to the state to do it, but they can do it. So why, I think it's very important. Anyway.
I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure who can answer them. Maybe Mr. Kremen even can, because it looks like this is going to take a change in state law to accomplish this, and I'm not sure where the legislature's at in their short session, whether that's even a possibility yet this year.
Is there a bill?
I think Erickson is working on a bill, if I'm not mistaken.
Mr. Kremen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is all my fault because when I was in the legislature, I passed a law that enabled communities within 10 miles of an international border to self-impose an up to a 1 cent per gallon gas tax. And it passed, and before it passed, the community of Point Roberts came to me and said, we'd like to be able to do that too. The problem is that Point Roberts wasn't a municipality, wasn't a city. And so the county council had to we found a legal way to include Point Roberts, and it could only be done with the county council approving a public transportation benefit district, a PTBA, which they did, and it was a unanimous vote, and enabled Point Roberts to collect up to 1 cent, and they took the 1 cent per gallon gasoline tax, but it had to be used like all other, with all the restrictions of gas tax. And what Point Roberts now wants is more flexibility and latitude for the use of that money. And in order to do that, they're going to have to get the legislature to give the okay to do that. I personally think that it will be very difficult, even if this were not a short session, to get that done. However, maybe Senator Erickson and some of his colleagues in Olympia would be able to, do a Houdini. But I think it's going to be a lot of heavy lifting to set precedents. But maybe because Point Roberts is a very unique, it's extremely, a unique community. Maybe the legislature will grant an exception for Point Roberts. But I see no reason not to allow our delegation to try to at least make an attempt to change the law to provide more flexibility and latitude, because there are special needs and circumstances for the community of Point Roberts, and I see no problem with this, and I'll support this.
Yeah, that's where I was going to. I also am going to support this. It's a self-imposed tax for the people of Point Roberts. They do have special needs. We said, I believe, as the transportation benefit districts. So if they choose that they want to use this money for this, it has to come to us for approval anyway, so we have some control. They just can't go wild and spend this money however they want.
That's true.
So if Senator Erickson wants to try to pull a miracle out, I don't want to stand in his way and would encourage him. Ms. Brenner.
Well, if it doesn't, at least we get the letter in. So if they don't do it this session, they can do it next session. I mean, if we don't do something, it's never probably going to happen without some added support.
Yep, Mr. Crawford.
So, and I'm just learning about this. So the money is collected by the gas stations from the consumer. The gas stations then report this out as tax collected and turn that over to the state. The state, in turn, dispenses the money back to the county, I presume. And does this go into our road fund? What's the county do? Where does this money go? Who has it?
There's a special fund.
District.
A county has the fund?
Yes.
Okay, so the county has the fund, and then we do additional road projects in Point Roberts using this fund, and decisions are made on road projects. In other words, they still get what they would get out of the road fund, and we do more, and we separate those. I have never seen in any road construction or maintenance program any separation out of additional projects based on the collection of this tax. The next question I'm going to have then, I'll just add them all into one long question. Are you saying the change would now go where the county would give the money to school districts out of the road fund to run buses?
They would work with the school district, and it has support from the Blaine School
No, I'm not
District.
asking about who's working with who. I'm saying how does this transfer of money occur that now this is paying for school buses?
They would have to change the law down in Olympia.
So the Olympia would then distribute the money to the school district directly, or we don't know?
No, it's our money to distribute. Mr. Kremen.
Well, you've already said what I was going to. It's our money to distribute. We would have to approve that, and I personally have a little bit of a problem augmenting the school district's responsibility for transportation of their students. But there have been several other requests from the Point Roberts community to use this one penny per gallon tax for various projects that would not be allowed under the current law.
Okay, you guys have convinced me. I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to support it. However, I'm going to, in the same breath, request that at some point, it doesn't have to be urgent, but at some point we get some presentation from the administration on what this fund is, where it goes, how we make decisions that are in addition to the regular road fund, and at least inform the council in the future what's being spent out of this fund as opposed to the regular road fund, because I don't recall ever seeing that or hearing about that.
If I may, as executive allows, currently we have $656,883 in that special fund. We collect approximately last couple of years have been about $96,000 a year. The fund can be spent on construction, maintenance, and operation of transportation facilities. Public Works, Joe Rutan specifically works with PRAC and members of the community up there. They come up with an advisory list on what they would like to be done. In some of the projects that we do up there through the budget, we allocate a portion of this money to it. If you go to the county park that's would be on the westerly side, Lighthouse Park I think is what it's called right now, leading back around to where the gas stations are and towards the border crossing, we are in the process or have done a widening of the shoulder there to provide a gravel walkway, pedestrian walkway alongside the road. There are certain things that we can use the money on. There's some that we can't. The big overlay that would happen there prior to, I think, me coming on as executive, a portion of the money was used at that. We do some signage alongside the roads. We're doing some parking improvements now down on the I'm sorry I can't get all the locations, but we're spending some of that money on a yearly basis and working with them. Currently, they're asking for some signage and stop signage at one of the particular intersections related to it. So they're asking for things that would be over and above what we would consider to be the minimum requirements that we would need for roads that's supporting that type of density. One thing that I would encourage is if we're going to be supportive of this, is that we make sure that we say that we'd be supportive of a certain percentage of it to go, and not make it so that they could divert or request that they could divert all of the money to things other than what they would like. What they originally intended the money to do was to give them monies to do over and above what the standard would be, because I think we all know is that once the expectation that it's there, if the money can be diverted off somewhere else to do something else, they're still going to have an expectation that we provide that level of service that we're providing right now. So I would say 15 to 20% of the fund at a maximum is what should be diverted from what the voters originally intended to have the money for, if indeed the council is supportive of this legislation at the state level. So that's my comments.
Councilmember Buchanan and then Browne.
Usually a transportation district has a board that makes these decisions. Who functions as this board? Is the county council?
Yeah, so I don't think.
And we've never talked about it.
We literally change hats for that board, or do we just take it up as the council?
As a council.
So, yeah, that's why I don't think we need to put a limitation.
Mr. Browne.
Yeah, that was basically my question, is if we allow the money to be used for other things, are we simply going to have to fill up that bucket with money from, say, the road fund? But it sounds like, if I understand it correctly, the council's ultimately going to decide what happens anyway. Okay.
Ms. Brenner.
And in addition to that, that's supposed to be for specific things that would be over and above what the county would do anyway. So it's not supposed to interfere with what's in the road fund to be, that the county would have done anyway. It's not supposed to be a substitute for what we would do anyway.
All right, we have the resolution in front of us that Ms. Brenner has moved. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Is there other business from any council members?
I'd like.
Mr. Browne.
So I'd like to first say that we started having a discussion earlier today about your Councilmember Weimer's water plan. And I just want to commend you for taking the leadership on that. I think it's a great first start on a very critical issue. So thank you for that. The other thing I'd just like to say, in the last 2 weeks, I met with Congresswoman Del Benny, and I'm pleased to report that our immediate conversation was on water. She understands the critical nature of water in this community, and I was very encouraged of her awareness of that. I've also spent some time visiting with the farming community in Acme and Linden. I appreciated the warm welcome I got, and I look forward to further opportunities to do the same. Thank you.
I think we've moved into the report area.
Well, I got one other business thing, because I missed that first part of it in committee. Was there any discussion? I like the water thing, but was there any discussion about having the planning unit be that all-purpose? They have almost every single one of those categories that you said, and I don't like creating another group to do a lot of similar things to what the planning unit would be doing.
No intention of creating another group. And I can fill you in a little bit. I mean, it seemed to meet general, everybody thought it was a good idea. I've heard from the Department of Ecology and Farm Friends and a number of groups thinking it's a good idea. It may need some tweaking. We talked about holding it back in natural resources to add whatever more whereases people want or to tweak the language. The county executive offered to fill that function, so Gary Stroika is going to take comments on it between now and the end of the day on Thursday. That must be February 20th. So if council members have additions they want to make, I think Mr. Browne had some additions. I'll send an email out tomorrow with a Word version of this in so people can tweak it if they want and get it to Gary Stroika by the end of the day on Thursday, the 20th, so it can come back to Natural Resources on the 25th for another discussion. Ms. Brenner.
But there's still, we're not adequately funding the planning unit, and both Ecology and Farm Friends are on it, as well as other groups that you put in there could be on it if they wanted to. They've chosen not to be on it. I'm just concerned about kind of devaluating the work that the planning unit needs to do for us. And I don't see how you're not, plus there's got to be costs involved. If Gary's going to be there and this and that, that's costs right there.
He's just putting together the next version of the resolution for us, and nothing more than that at this point. All the groups, including the planning unit, were involved as if they decided to want to comment. And I believe I heard that the planning unit will be bringing a proposal to us for $20,000 of support at our next meeting. Okay. And they've already asked the joint board, I think, for a similar amount of money. So I really don't want to mix the planning unit into this effort at this point anyway. Mr. Browne.
So when you send out the Word document, my understanding is we have to send that back to Gary as opposed to you.
When you send it back to Gary, we can't play round robin between us because at that point we're deliberating via email.
Right. And Madam Clerk, if you could take my earlier comments that I've said under other business and put them under reports more accurately. Thank you.
Any other business? How about reports? Mr. Crawford.
I'll spare you.
The only thing I wanted to let people know is I will not be at the next council meeting, so Mr. Mann is going to be in charge. So I'm going to try to set up all kinds of controversial issues, and then I'm going to run out of town.
Well, speaking of what is normally controversial and very well attended, in Planning Committee today we talked about population projections and growth and 2016 comp plan update, and it was remarkably free from vitriol and debate, actually. And I think the cities have done a really, really good job of collaborating and bringing to us a preliminary proposal that I think will look a lot like our final proposal. So we had a few questions, and they're going to bring it back to us at our next Planning Committee meeting, at which point we'll make a recommendation to the council as a whole, and then we'll introduce it and have a hearing on it. But the report is that we're making really good progress on this, on the population projections and the land capacity analysis, and I think we're going to get over that hurdle and onto the even more challenging issue of where to put all these people when they get here.
Mr. Buchanan? Mr. Browne, any other reports? All right. Seeing nothing else, we are adjourned.